Okay, we're going to move ahead with a lesson of white magic. We're getting near the end of Rule 5 finally. It's a lot of meat in this rule to cover. Um, Dan asked a question that's in uh, harmony with the Tibetan's teachings. He teaches a lot about being the observer. And Rick uh, made a post pointing out that's kind of difficult to do in real life. Why don't you give us your thoughts on that, what you've been thinking about that, Dan, or Nimrod?
Well, what I found for myself is it's really very hard for me to actually get myself to do the observation. I can think about it, I can read about it, I can, do everything except, actually get myself to try it. And so one of the questions I had was just, why is it so damn hard to get myself talked into doing something?
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
it is. It can be difficult, especially at first. Now, let me just recap really quickly what the principle of the observer is. Um, it's a little bit like William Shakespeare talked about. He says, all the world's a stage, and uh, we're all players, and each man in his time plays many parts. And our life is a little bit like a stage. Matter of fact, before we were born, we, in connection with others, we actually planned this life, and we kind of figured out what kind of role that we were going to take, and then we come down here and we try to fulfill playing that role. And in a way, we are an observer. Now, the interesting thing about a play is an actor in the play can play like he's in tremendous pain, but when he's doing the act, he isn't. He's detached from that pain because he's uh, acting from the viewpoint of the observer. In other words, he's kind of observing himself acting, realizing that he is not really undergoing the pain, but he's just participating in the show, you know. And so if a person is going through a very painful period, like say a divorce or something like this, say especially emotional pain, uh, if he can detach himself so he can say, well, look, this is a process I'm going through, and I'm going to detach myself from this situation so it will not be nearly as painful. Because when I realize I'm the observer, I can take the viewpoint of the observer. I, you can then go through a lot of really distressful things, and if you're detached from it, then it will not be nearly as painful. You can go through tremendous emotional trauma and quite a bit of physical too. Like uh, if I get a root canal or a crown or whatever, I don't get any deadening or anything. I just sit in the chair and I try to detach myself from the situation. And there's still some pain there, but it's not as bad when you're detached from it. Now, I think when I mentioned that one time, I think Mindy told me she does a similar thing. Can you tell us what you do, Mindy? Are you there?
Yep, I had to turn my microphone back on. I just pay attention to what it feels like, but don't think of it as being pain. So it's just another experience. But I've had surgeries without anesthesia and different things, and
Yeah.
it's kind of like you transmute the pain into just a different sensation, like pressure or something.
Yeah.
So
Okay. So yeah, it is possible. It's kind of, there's a fragment of the Gospel of Peter that says when Jesus was on the cross that he was laughing because he had the power to just neutralize the pain, and so he was observing what was going on, and he apparently thought something was funny, according to this fragment of Gospel of Peter. I always wondered if that was true or not. That would be interesting to find out. But yeah, I imagine if that were true, the people who crucified him probably somewhat befuddled by an attitude like that. Um, but he definitely had power to neutralize the pain if that's what he decided. My gut feeling is he went through quite a bit of it. Uh, the real pain he went through was in the Garden of Gethsemane. So maybe the cross was kind of a piece of cake for him. Okay.
I had some very close encounters with other vehicles on my journey out to Colorado. In one case, I had to narrowly swerve to avoid hitting the back end of a semi truck that was stopped.
Wow.
And I lost one mirror out of that.
Wow.
I pulled over to the side to get out and look, and the first thing I did was I go, "Well, thank you, Father. That was one heck of a fun adventure." And it makes all different. You know, I could have been blown away for days. Oh my God, I've got damage on my motorhome. And I just thought, oh man, I asked for an adventure. I got one.
So, yeah. So you came close enough. You knocked a mirror off from.
Yeah.
Wow.
That was the only thing that knocked off that time. The next day, I got 2 new tires on the front, and I had to go to the shop to run my card through. And as I'm going through his shop, without a right-hand mirror, I couldn't see how close I was coming to this one truck. Well, it tore off a whole bottom panel on the right side because of that. And yeah. There's still falling pieces coming out of it. So yesterday we went and bought a welder. I'm going to have to weld the back end together again.
I'll be darned.
But I asked for an adventure, and I'm definitely getting it. So I haven't been, none of this stuff's been bothering me.
Like they say, beware what you ask for. Yeah.
But the thing is, if you go in that with that attitude that, hey, I'm sailing the seas, I'm finding new lands and I'm finding all kinds of communities. Every place I look, any group, you look around like this farm right here, for as far as you can see, all these people know each other and they work together as they're like a little town out of the middle of nowhere, but they're not officially a town. They're just a bunch of people that live within eyesight of each other. And I found the same thing out at Stacy's. There's a bunch of people live around these 2 little ponds that they've made, and they've got a community going there. It's like there's something going on about people building communities wherever they are.
Yeah, there's a lot of people have a desire to do that. Okay, let's get back on the subject. To see yourself as an observer, and say you have maybe death in the family, or divorce, or financial crisis, whatever. There's lots of things that can disturb you, and one of the reasons it's important to be the observer is if you identify too much with what's going on in your life, and that could include good things as well as bad, it distracts you from your communication with your higher self. So it distracts you from, if you pick up higher will, something you're supposed to do, and then get distracted because you're identifying too much with what's going on in your life, you won't make nearly as much spiritual progress. So this is why it's important to learn to be the observer, so that you can see these situations occurring in your life, merely observe them, and then have your consciousness focus on doing some type of service that is impressed upon you by your soul. And so this is why being the observer is important. And the first steps, if you don't feel that you've been able to attain this attitude, the first steps have to be taken through the power of the will. Now just think there's certain times in your life that you just like if you don't feel like getting out of bed and you know you have to get out of bed because you got to go to work. Sometimes you sit there for maybe, do you think maybe 30 more seconds, but you reach a point where you just can't stay in bed any longer. So so even though you maybe didn't get much sleep or whatever, you have to get up. You have to use your will to force yourself out of bed. Okay, you have to use this willpower with a lot of other things in life, including being the observer. The next time a situation occurs that is going to distract you, make you identify too much with the form life, force yourself to be the observer. It has to be done the first few times through the power of will. And you have a lot more will than you give yourself credit for. Look, I mean, we don't give ourselves enough credit for the power of will that is within us. Each of us has a tremendous power if it is revived. And one of the greatest examples of that was the movie Rocky II, where his wife didn't want him to fight anymore. And then she got sick, and he was near her bed, and she was in a coma and everything, and he was there for a couple of days. And she finally come out of the coma, and he says, "Honey," he says, "if you don't want me to fight anymore, I'm not going to do it." I said, "Whatever you say." And she says, "Well, there is something I want." And she says, "I want you to fight and to win." And all of a sudden, the music started going, you know, the Rocky music, and you could see a clicking in Rocky's head that all of a sudden he had a determination he never had before. He had a strength of will that he never had before because his wife just sparked it in him. And we can spark it in each other. It's important that we encourage people to use their willpower. But the most important person for us to encourage is ourselves, because when it comes down to it, sometimes it's just you, God, and your will. You got that triangle right together, and that willpower has to be stimulated. And if it is stimulated, miracles can happen. But after the person becomes the observer and does it a number of times, then it becomes a habit. And then when a situation occurs, you just automatically become the observer. Like when Mindy goes to the dentist now, she probably automatically just turns on her state of mind and doesn't need any Novocaine. Isn't that right, Mindy? We'll assume that's right.
Yeah.
But
That's not a problem.
yeah, I imagine you're pretty good at being the observer in other parts of your life too. You've had a number of painful experiences in your life. Do you feel that you've been able to be the observer, and that helps you through some of them? What do you think?
Are you talking to me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure it does help. I read a yoga book when I was about 10 years old, and it taught you how to like stick pins in your fingers and stuff and not really feel it and just be the observer. And I always found that fascinating. So I studied.
Did you actually stick pins in yourself?
I did.
You did? Wow, what a gal.
That was my entertainment sitting through class in high school.
Wow. I'll be darned. Well, that was, I never heard of that exercise before, and I don't know if
And I
I'd,
also studied hypnotherapy, so I've learned how to work with that too.
yeah,
Basically
yeah,
the same idea. And most pain is fear related, I think.
yeah. Okay. Okay, Dan, any other questions on this subject? Don't know if that helps you or not, but hopefully.
No, I don't think so.
JJ, one thing that helped me understand what it's like to become an observer in your post was when you talked about, I think you gave an example of, you might be sitting at home, you might have a terrible pounding headache, and then suddenly the doorbell rings and it's somebody you haven't seen in a long time that you care a lot about, and you're just overwhelmed with joy at seeing the person. I believe I read that, in your
Yeah,
post.
right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that for some reason, that example really clicked with me and helped me understand the observer principle a little bit better.
Yeah,
Because
let me recap that. I was telling the story about a guy has a tremendous headache and really bothers him a lot. The doorbell rings and it's his long lost love that was the love of his life wants to get back together again, and they get together and they talk. And after they talk for about an hour, it just dawns on him that his head hasn't he hasn't had a headache at all for the last hour because his attention was taken completely off of it. Yeah.
that resonated with me because I have had that experience, like.
Yeah. Right. When something really good, if you have a big headache and you find out you won $1 million on the lottery, I guarantee that head won't ache so much
Yeah.
for a while.
At our age now, there's lots of things that lots of headaches you can have, and we get lots of practice on ignoring those things.
Yeah, the older you get, the more possibility of aches.
I'm hanging out with my 4 grandkids that I haven't even met until this week, and it's like, well, they'll wear me out. I'm going to take my naps. So when you start hanging out with a 6-year-old, you better have some reserve energy.
Yeah. Okay, we'll move on with Rule 5 here. DK says there are 7 types of energy the seeker must work with. Now, remember, Rule 5 is about the disciple being equipped so he can be a useful servant. And there are 7 types of energy we can work with, but there's 3 that's the most important. The first is that of the will. It's interesting, we were just talking about the importance of the will. And the will happens through the medium of the head center. The soul then uses the will to control the personality. So this is one thing that can really increase the power of the will, is soul contact itself, because the soul has a strong sense of will, and it's attempting to harmonize with our physical personality self so that the lower is in control of is controlled by the higher. Now the stream of force for the will, it originates in the monad. The monad is the original point of light that is connected with God, the original intelligence. It comes down through the Atma, and the Atmic plane is the plane of ideas that we can tune into. And then it circulates to the inner petals of the egoic lotus. The mental body is composed of mental matter. And then the mental body links with the soul because the soul body is composed of mental matter instead of physical matter. And then the head center and the etheric body, and then the nervous system and the brain. So it's the will makes all these connecting points. How do you suppose the will of the soul, we can call it the will of God, because God uses the soul as a vehicle to contact us. How does the will of the soul or the will of God assume control of the person's life? That'd be a good question for you, Jules, or Red Fox. You want us to call you Red Fox or Jules?
You can call me Jules.
Okay. I have a niece that's a good supporter of the group. She goes by the name of Red Trouble.
Yeah, that's kind of what my stepdad used to call me when I was growing up.
Oh, really?
That's where the red came.
Yeah. Have you had an incident in your life where you kind of felt like you had to harmonize with higher will?
Where I had to, I think,
Yeah.
isn't that like what we're all life? The object is that we need to harmonize with higher will so that we can.
Yeah, but there's sometimes that you kind of get a feeling of something you're supposed to do that takes you beyond the normal.
I've had lots of experiences like that.
Yeah.
I tend to be emotional, and a lot of times that higher will is telling me, no, you have to do this. It's way more important than your emotions right now. And there have been a lot of things. I've had times that have saved my life where I've put the emotions aside and gone, okay, I really need to follow this.
So have you had things happen where you've had an impression you're supposed to do something that didn't make sense at the time, but made sense
Lots
later?
of times.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I
You
don't.
said,
I had an entire vacation planned and literally couldn't get myself out the door. Something told me, no, you can't go. So whole family didn't go on vacation, and I found out a couple days later that my tire had a big bubble on it, and it would have probably blown, and we would have gotten an accident. And I had no idea. Stuff like that. That kind of
that,
thing happens all the
that
time.
reminds me of an experience I had. I won't take time to go into it. It'd take a while, but okay. Yeah. Well, so the all these impressions we get are like practice for us in increasing our will. So to increase our willpower can solve a lot of problems, because without willpower, a lot of people say, some New Age teachers kind of discount willpower, but when it comes down to it, sometimes willpower really makes a difference. And sometimes the impressions you get from uh, that that you're supposed to do takes a lot of willpower to follow through with it. Okay, the second thing, types of energy that the disciple must work with, is that of love wisdom. And the love wisdom works itself through what center? What center does love wisdom work through?
The heart center.
Right, the heart center. And the heart center has how many petals, Edward?
Well, I don't remember how many petals it has.
Okay, sorry to put you on the spot. Okay, it's 12 petals, and each one of these petals is representative of either love or wisdom. And when they unfold, there's a different type of love energy that the disciple begins to pick up and master. Here's Tibetan's words on this. He says, this center, when awakened, leads to that expansion of consciousness which initiates a man into his group life. He loses a sense of separativeness and finally emerges into the full light of realization, a realization of unity with his own indwelling God, with all humanity, with all souls and all forms of nature, and so with the oversoul. This fourth stream comes likewise from the monad, or originating point. So when we first tune into the heart energy, the person feels like he wants to be useful to a group, and then eventually he wants to emulate the Christ or a master or a great teacher, and then he loses himself in service. Okay, the love wisdom comes from spiritual love, and then there's a second circle of petals in the egoic lotus. We'll have to explain what that is. And it works through the astral body, the heart center, and the bloodstream. You ever think that the love wisdom energy actually works through the bloodstream? That's a kind of interesting thought. Okay. For the beginner, this love wisdom energy is sent to the solar plexus. And when the this is the emotional center, and so his emotions are very stimulated, and then when it works through the solar plexus, which is around the navel area, he thinks of how all this spiritual stuff is going to benefit him. But then when it starts working through the heart, he thinks of what I can do to benefit other people. And so it eventually evolves into that. Next is that of Ray 3, that of active intelligence, or the energy which animates the form aspect. All form is created by this Ray 3, which is symbolic of the Holy Ghost, and this energy works through form. He says that energy which animates the form aspect and which creates forms in line with the subjective purposes of the presiding intelligence, God or man or human or divine. This also proceeds from the third aspect of the monad. Now, he makes an interesting statement here. He says, he talks about the disciple has to be able to create forms in line with the purposes of the presiding intelligence. The presiding intelligence would be your higher self, which is connected to God. Okay, so there's a presiding intelligence, and it will guide you to create forms. What types of forms are we supposed to be creating as disciples? What does that mean? That we are supposed to use this divine third aspect of the Godhead to create forms.
We're supposed to create beneficial thought forms.
Okay, that's one of the forms. Yeah, just visualizing forms. How about actual physical forms? Them too, you think?
Well, in every domain, there has to be improvement, and we have the ability to create beneficial forms in mind and as well as in the physical world.
Right, right. Okay, yeah. Thought forms is really good. Also, maybe it could even be a business. Maybe you, it's important that you create a beneficial business that can provide for you, your family, and provide a service for humanity. And maybe this is one of the forms also. So it could be that.
Could it also be forms of energy? Could it also be forms of energy? In other words, these triangles of energy, we're trying to create this
right, the molecular relationship. What we're doing right here is a form that we're trying to create. Yeah.
Right, yeah.
Okay.
One of the things I've noticed is that we've been trying to write these magical path stories, illustrated story books for kids and adults, of course. And what I find is that after we've talked about these topics in our triad, and then I go and create an illustration, that illustration tells the whole story right there. And a picture tells 1,000 words. It's like,
yeah.
If kids were to look just at the pictures in these stories they were writing, they'd get the whole thing. They would learn how to read because they remembered what the adult was reading to them while they were looking at these pictures, and they have more words in these pictures than the adults ever read in between the pictures. And something inspiring that I'm getting from the Blue Triad is putting stuff in these pictures that I wasn't even planning on, and yet it really conveys the message better than anything we could put into words between these pictures. There's
Yeah.
some kind of magic going on.
So
with
you
this stuff.
got a form there that you're trying to create. So there's positive forms and there's negative forms. So say a cancer is a very negative form, for instance, and that's caused by thought that is out of harmony with higher will. Whereas good health is a manifestation of a bodily form that's in harmony with higher will. So to sum this up, we have three types of energy the disciple needs to master. First of all, it's higher will, symbolic of the father energy. Love wisdom, symbolic of the son energy. And it manifests through the heart and the blood. And then the active intelligence, which is symbolic of the Holy Ghost energy, so to speak, and it manifests in final form through the throat center and the cells of our body. The cells of our body are actually created with this divine intelligence. Okay, he says, and again, he talks about the importance in mastering this of moving the sacral centers up to the throat, because to be a creator where we're creating positive forms, the sacral center governs the sexual energy, and this needs to be mastered. This is why all the religions of the world teach certain self-control related to sex, because it's important that it be mastered and directed in a positive way. And when it is, he tells us that this energy from the sexual energy rises up to the throat, and from the throat the person can have more power to create good things in the physical world, from music to art to scientific inventions. Leave it to Rick there to do that. And maybe creation of buildings, all kinds of things, writings that a person can do when he has transmuted the lower creative energy into the higher creative energies. Okay, he says, every human being in the course of time works his way back to the path of return on one of these three major rays. The first center, which aspirant seeks to consciously energize, on which he concentrates during the early stages of his work, is the heart center. He has to learn to be group conscious. So the first center that you have the lower centers and the higher centers. The heart is one of the higher centers, and it's the first one that the disciple, as he goes through quite a number of lives, he finally begins to center on spiritual love and gets a feeling about what spiritual love is. And when he does that, he begins to stimulate the heart center. This must be stimulated first, because the person must get an idea of spiritual love and service and losing self in love of others before he can safely develop all of his other talents. If he develops his other talents and ability before he develops love for humanity, then he can turn into a literal monster, because if he has a lot of ability, like Hitler had a lot of ability, but he didn't. They weren't tempered with love. And so he turned into a tyrant instead of a servant. And so this happens to a lot of people. And so they need to get back, we need to get back on track and develop the love aspect first. He points out that none of us, or at least very few of us, are purely selfish. And humanity itself has awakened some heart energy within the humanity itself. So this is a good sign that when you meet people in general life, most people are, you know, fairly decent. If people have their basic needs taken care of, you know, they don't have much desire to do you harm. Let me see. Who haven't I called on? Nick. What do you think about people? You think most people are pretty decent?
Well, gee. Yeah, I think deep down, you know, obviously people have a soul, and to the extent that that isn't covered over by lots of other stuff, I think people are basically decent, yeah.
Yeah, it seems like when you meet just some stranger or something, start talking to him, most people seem like they're more good in them than bad. Wouldn't you say that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I find that to be true. But then there's always attitude works into it. Somebody, a guy moves in this new neighborhood and he asks a neighbor, he says, what's people like in this neighborhood? And he says, well, what were they like where he just came from? He says, oh, there were a bunch of SOBs. And he says, well, there'll be a bunch of SOBs here too. So in other words, if how we see others is filtered a lot by our own minds. If we come from a place where everybody seemed to be really bad people and then move to somewhere else, well, we'll find bad people there too. You meet certain people that just wherever they go, they seem to meet wonderful people everywhere. And other people, wherever they go, they seem to meet people that are just really think they take advantage of them. But so a lot of that is attitude, but I found overall that most people have more good in them than bad. They want to do good in the world and they want to be useful. They may not be seeking higher spiritual knowledge, but the average person wants to do more good than bad, I find, and that's encouraging. And that's going along with what DK says, is that the heart center of the whole planet is beginning to be awakened. And so that's heartening. He says the heart center interplays with the throat. And remember, the heart is love wisdom. The throat is the creative center, governs the creative energies. And when you have the interplay of these two centers, the light in the head manifests as the result of this interplay. So you will, if it's interplaying and you close your eyes and concentrate on the third eye area, you can actually see light in your head. And that can take you different places. And he says the center between the eyebrows also begins to make its presence felt when there's this interplay. And this significant two-petal lotus begins to vibrate. You have right here in the forehead, you have two petals, one on each side, and it begins to vibrate and bringing in harmony, you in harmony with the higher self. Then he says this is kind of interesting. The sum total of the force petals in the lower five centers amounts to 48 petals. You have like 12 petals in the heart center and 10 in the solar plexus and so on. You add up all the petals in the 5 lower centers. They add up to 48. Now, each one of these petals, remember, is an energy, and over a period of many lifetimes, we have new energies unfolding, and they're like flowers, and they open up. And when you have a new petal opens up in one of your centers, you will feel a new stimulating energy coming into your life. And so you have 48 petals in these lower 5. These energies, and there's 2 aspects of the physical and vital energy, and the soul qualities make up 96 aspects or vibrations of the 2 petals in the center. Now, you have 2 petals right here, and each one of these has 48 petals on each side, making 96. Okay, the 5 petals with their 48, the 5 centers with their 48 petals are synthesized, therefore, into the 2-petal lotus right here. 2 petals with 48 on each side. And then we have 48 plus the 2 equals 50, which is an interesting number. That's the number of the perfected personality. 5 is the number of man, and 10 is the number of perfection. So symbolically also, if the number of the 48 petals of the 5 centers is added to the 96 petals of the center between the eyebrow, the number 144 appears, where we heard that number before. This number signifies the completed work of the 12 creative hierarchies. To these figures, 144, add the number of 1,000, which is the number of petals of the crown chakra. You have 1,000 petals there. So you multiply that times 144, you have the 144,000 from the book of Revelations that stand before God. When man has completed within himself the great work, then, the number 144,000 is seen as symbolizing his point of attainment. He can stand before God, standing now not only before the angel of the presence, but before the very presence itself. So that's a goal that all of us need to work for. And as we achieve it, follow higher will and produce, just go one step at a time until we attain, we eventually reach that point where all of these centers become, all these energy petals become active and stimulated. And then he says you can then endure the presence. The question arises, how can this awakening and coordination of the 3 centers be brought about? And there's 9 different things that we can do that he talks about. The first thing we can do to bring us to that point of perfection is character building. Character building is number 1. And this is what's taught in all the churches. And this is about as far as they go, is teaching you to be a good character, teaching you to be loving, humble, kind, and follow the example of Christ. You know, they teach all these good things in Sunday school, and he says these are, you know, we hear these things again and again, and sometimes we take it for granted, but each one of us has to take stock of ourselves and ask ourselves, are we basically a good character? And so this is the first thing each one of us has to do. And as far as I know, everybody here is has pretty good character and good people. And I'm sure everybody here is made pretty good progress in this step number 1. Step number 1, once this is completed, then you pretty much learn what you can from the churches, and it's pretty much time to move on to something higher after that. Okay, next he says, I'm just going to read these off, then we'll go through them. Then he says, right motive, service, meditation. Number 5, technical study of the science of the centers. 6, breathing exercises. 7, learning the technique of the will. 8, the development of the power to employ time. And 9, the rousing of the Kundalini fire, which is basically the fire of the spirit. He says this, do you realize that truth has to be wrought out in the texture of daily living before new truth can be safely imparted? That's an interesting statement, question that he asked. And that's true. If we're often looking for new and unique truths, something to titillate us when we haven't incorporated the truth we've already received. So we must incorporate the truth we've already received before we can be given more. Then he goes into great, some more detail about these steps that the disciple has to go through in order to achieve discipleship and be of true service to humanity. First of all, the character building, we talked about that. And this helps to subordinate the lower energies to the will of the soul. So if you're told, help your brother out when it's time of need, and that it takes a little bit of effort on your part, this work that you're doing, whether it's service to an individual or group or whatever, is subordinating the lower energies. So the lower energies have to be subservient to the higher. This is a very important first step. Second step, he says, right motive. And this is what each disciple needs to ask as he leaves Religion 101 and moves on to becoming a true seeker. He must ask himself, what is your motive towards seeking light and knowledge? What is your motive? Okay, all of us need to ask ourselves, why are we here right now? Why are we here trying to accomplish something? What is our motive? And how does motive actually evolve? The motive of the aspirant evolves from a dedication to a teacher, then a desire to emulate the teacher, and then eventually service. So this is one of the things we want to examine in our motive is, do we how close are we in our motive to just losing ourselves to the group, to the whole, to humanity, to being a servant for humanity? Jesus' words come to mind. He says, whoever seeks to save his life shall lose it, but whoever shall lose his life for my sake shall save it. And this is what the Tibetan is getting at when he says that we evolve from being just kind of curious and kind of interested in what some teacher has to say to finally emulating the teacher, and then the final step is losing yourself in the service of humanity. And that's the most important part of the motive that we could acquire. Okay, the third is service. Right motive, and these are in sequence. First of all, we have to have good character. Before you can really have the highest motive, you have to develop good character first. Then once you have a pure motive, then you can be of true service. Because have you ever noticed some really religious people, they think they're doing you a favor when they're just irritating you? It's because their motives aren't really in tune with what you know would really benefit you. So once the person develops his character and then develops a right motive, then his service can start to really count. Instead of just doing busy work or work that just annoys people, or maybe work that doesn't really accomplish anything, once the person has a motive in alignment with the soul, he then can perform a service that will really be helpful to his brethren. Then after this, after he becomes a good servant, then he can become a beneficial meditator. And he says something here about meditation I don't recall him saying in his other books. He says, meditation is dangerous when the desire to serve is lacking. Usually we just hear meditation is really great, but here he says, if the person doesn't have a true good motive and a desire to serve, meditation can actually amplify wrong desires and give him more power to do what is wrong rather than to do what is right. So the person, if he's going to be serious about entering meditation and the world within, he needs to make sure his motive is good and his ability to serve is headed the right direction. He says assimilation and elimination are laws of soul life as well as the physical life. And when this simple law is disregarded, serious consequences will follow, inevitably as in the physical body. Okay, the next step up, after he learns to finally meditate and contemplate on the right things, where the right, he will then bring flows of energy that will cause his service to be beneficial for humanity. Then it's important to study the centers. As you know, we have 7 major centers, and they all have a different purpose. All work done by students must be done entirely in the head and from the head. There is the seat of the will or the spirit aspect working through the soul. And it's interesting, in giving blessings, we often put our hands on the crown of the head because that's the seat of the soul, is in the head. The 2 head centers, we have 2 head centers right here between the eyebrows and then at the crown of the head. And when they interplay correctly, then the soul, the higher self, then assumes control of the lower centers. But until that time, the lower centers become quite difficult to control. The most difficult center to control is what? What do you think is the most difficult, Joshua? For the average person? Oh, sorry, you're away from the video there. What center do you think is most difficult to control for the average person?
Oh, I didn't have it. I was saying probably the head center, because that's got all the other petals contained in it, sort of, and all the lessons through various.
Well, except for the average person, the head center is a very awakened yet, so he doesn't have much.
Oh, you mean controlled of the ones that are really active?
Yeah.
I mean, I guess it would probably be sacral or solar plexus.
Right, right. Solar plexus would be probably the most difficult. Sacral is difficult too. That controls the sexual energy. But the emotional energy, it lingers even after the person controls the sexual energy. The emotional energy is difficult to finally put under complete control. So it's subordinated to the spirit instead of controlling the spirit. Okay. The next the next step is in breathing exercises. And there's all kinds of breathing exercises out there. And he says important breathing exercises for the disciple are exercises that we incorporate in our regular breathing. And we went through this a few weeks ago. And he points out this. He says that air is very symbolic of spirit. And so if we get more oxygen in our body, it actually makes it easier to contact the higher spiritual energies and have higher spiritual contact. So that's kind of interesting. Matter of fact, people report different types of breathing exercises makes them have spiritual experiences. And now DK points out that for just a lot of these unusual breathing exercises, they can do more harm than good. So a person needs to, if he's going to attempt some of these unusual breathing exercises, he needs to follow his soul very close, check how they register with you or the effects they have on you, because they can release energies that you're not prepared for. So it would be ideal to have a knowledgeable teacher guide you through any unusual breathing exercises. But what he recommends, which is safe, are exercises that you incorporate in your normal breathing and learn to breathe correctly. Okay? And we talked about this before, but correct breathing is where you go 3 stages. The first stage, where you breathe in, you pretty much breathe in your upper chest. And then the second stage, you breathe in clear down to your tummy. And then the third stage, you breathe in through the whole chest area and fill it up more. So you breathe in those 3 stages and then breathe out. Now you can also go through stages of counting. You count, you breathe in 1, 2, 3, 4, hold it for maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, and then breathe out maybe the count of 8. Now go through this and count it to yourself and find a breathing sequence that feels right to you, where you're breathing in more oxygen than normal. Okay, you want to breathe in more oxygen than normal, and you will do this through deep breathing. And if you breathe in more oxygen than normal, your vitality will increase, your health will be better, and you'll have easier access to spiritual energies and higher lives. So he recommends that. So probably the best one is like breathe in the count of 4, hold it for 2 to 4 counts, and then breathe out 8. And when you breathe out where the air is completely out. And then you can hold it again for a couple counts if you want after you breathe out. But experiment with that until you feel that you're bringing in more oxygen than you normally would. And try to make it and try to incorporate it into your standard breathing. Okay, then he talks about learning the technique of the will. Learn to use the will through the development of steady purpose, organizing of the daily life so that it may reach fulfillment. He says he's not going to give a lot of details on these. He says using the will is correctly takes a lot of development for the disciple. Then the power to employ time. He said, learn to do something more with time besides just organize it and use it. Learn to do several things simultaneously. Okay, for example, breathing, and then count your breaths, and then listen to the voice of the soul all at the same time. He says, practice doing several things at one time. And then the final thing is rousing the Kundalini fire. Basically, the disciple undergoes the baptism of fire. And then by that time, he should be ready to be a usable servant in the hand of the hierarchy. Okay, that's about it. Any questions before we move on?
I've been thinking lately that a good barometer of your own advancement along these lines is if you start finding yourself really full of joy all the time, you must be doing something right. And I lately being
Well, you
hooked up,
seem pretty happy lately.
I have, and it's all because of I love my triad that I'm in, and I think of them when I have a picture I on my desktop, one click of the button, I've got my triad full screen. I'm looking at all their faces, and it just makes me just so happy to look at these guys. You know, I was like, wow, I'm like the luckiest guy in the world. I'm in this triad, and it's like I must be doing something right, I guess, because I'm smiling all the time. I walk in, what's so funny, Rick? I go, you know, I just had lunch with God or something. You know.
Good. Oh, you're having problems with your foot a while back. How's that?
It's still there, but
So
I'm also trying
you're
to.
still happy even though your foot still hurts, huh?
I do. I get up and I took out my trash from the trailer today, and up where their trash can is at the front gate, which is about, if he was in a city, it'd be a good 2-block walk just to take the trash out. And I
Yeah.
did that, and it's like I got a little slow towards when I got to the road and coming back. I had to go really, really slow. And I'm thinking to myself, well, you know, what's nice about going slow is you see all these other things that you normally just zip right on past. So it's like, it's all good, you know. So what? It hurts, but it slowed me down, and I get to see more scenery that way. So if I have a good attitude, I don't really care if it hurts.
Well, you seem to be pretty cheerful. Oh, we got a new member here, Kristen. Kristen, are you there? Anyway, maybe she doesn't have audio, but welcome to the group. This is her first time. She's related to Johan. I'm not sure if it's a sister or what. But anyway, hope to see more of you. Okay, we're going to end by saying the song of the 144,000, and then we'll call it a night. And follow me along. Unfortunately, we won't be able to hear each other's voices because just doesn't work very good where we all join in that way. But so follow along with me. Om, 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 om. We thank you, Father, that you have revealed to us your protective universal light, that within this light is complete protection from all destructive forces, that the Holy Spirit of your presence permeates us in the light, and wherever we will the light to descend. Now sound the Om silently in between. That's very powerful too. Just say it within your own soul. We thank you, Father, that you fill us with your protective fires of love, that within this love is complete protection from all destructive thoughts and feelings, that the consciousness of Christ is lifted up in us in this love, and wherever we will, the love to be inflamed. We thank you, Father, that you are in us and we are in you, that through us your will is sent forth on wings of power, that your purpose is accomplished on earth as it is in heaven, that through us your light and love and power is manifest to all the sons and daughters of mankind. Now, the song itself clears away a lot of negative energy, but sounding the Om kind of seals that negative energy and puts it in its own place. So only the positive remains. Feel the negative energy all disappearing. Om, 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 om. Om, 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 om. Close your eyes and look up. You should be able to see some light. Visualize a light filling your whole body. And say these words. We join with Christ in being the light of the world. Amen. Okay, great group today, and glad to see a new face or two show up every week. And we shall see you. I'll post the next meeting in the next couple of days.
Hey, love and light, everybody. Good night.
Night, JJ. Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone. It's good to meet at a good time.
Yeah. Okay, night night.
And next month is September. Gathering.
Yeah, won't be long now.